Welcome to The Explainer. Go ahead and step out of the light, settle in, because today we are breaking down the chilling architecture of an Oregon urban legend. The story of the Lantern Men isn't just your standard ghost story. It is a meticulously structured nightmare. It's about desperation, brutal frontier justice, and a curse that literally refuses to die. We're going to map out exactly how this legend operates, rule by terrifying rule. Okay, let's dive into this. To understand the curse, we first have to understand the geography of the isolation. Mill Creek is this tiny logging town, and right on its edge sits Blackwood Forest. We are talking about 40,000 acres of dense pine and suffocating fog. This is a place where locals simply stopped talking about the things that happened in the dark. Let's follow two young men, Jake and Tyler, right into those very woods. Now, Jake and Tyler, they weren't bad guys. They were just broke. It was November, right in the middle of deer season, and rent was due. They planned a quick, late-night hunt to secure some meat. But before they left, an old-timer named Earl stopped them at the local diner with this exact dead serious warning. You follow a light in those woods, son. You don't come back the same, if you come back at all. This explainer is a cautionary tale of exactly what happens when you make a desperate choice and ignore the people who know the land better than you do. Section 1. Into Blackwood Forest, a desperate descent. So, despite the warnings, Jake, Tyler, and Jake's 3-year-old German Shepherd, Duke, cross the tree line.
Let's trace their exact timeline to see how this unfolds. The descent into the unnatural happens slowly, almost like a ticking clock. They enter the North Trail at 11:17 p.m. For over an hour, it's perfectly normal, just cold and quiet. But at 12:40 a.m., the shift begins. Duke the dog abruptly stops. He's whining, just staring dead into the pitch-black trees. Then, 100 yards ahead, a light appears. It's not a modern flashlight. It's an old brass Coleman lantern. It's floating at chest height, swaying, like it's being carried by an invisible hand. It slowly moves away, coaxing them to follow. And tragically, they do. Until 1:22 a.m., when the lantern finally comes to a dead stop.
Actually, before we reach that 1:22 a.m. mark, I want to pause on this critical detail. Just before the lantern stopped, Duke sat down at a fallen log and absolutely refused to move forward. You know, in folklore, animals are deeply attuned to the supernatural. They sense predatory energy way before our human logic allows us to accept it. Leaving Duke behind meant Jake and Tyler were now completely, utterly isolated. Section 2. The Faceless Entity, the Confrontation. We arrive at 1:22 a.m. The men step into a tight clearing. The fog is impossibly thick, and the ambient temperature drops 15 degrees in a single second. Their breath is turning to white clouds. In the center of the clearing stands a man with his back to them, the brass lantern resting on the dirt at his feet. Tyler calls out, asking if the man is lost. No reaction. For 10 full seconds, nothing. Then it slowly turns its head 90 degrees. And they saw it. He didn't have a face. And this brilliantly illustrates the crude, terrifying anatomy of the horror they faced. This entity wasn't some translucent ghost. It was entirely physical. 6 feet tall, wearing an old green flannel shirt, torn jeans, and muddy work boots. But from the neck up, it was a nightmare. Pale, smooth skin with no eyes or nose. And most horrifyingly, right where a mouth should have been, there was thick black fishing line, stitched in crude, jagged lines from ear to ear. As Tyler raised his rifle in pure panic, the entity simply raised an arm and pointed directly behind them. They didn't even look. They just ran.
Jake and Tyler spent the next hour just being herded through the black woods by the light, totally disoriented, until they miraculously collapsed on an old logging road. They survived the night. But as we pivot from their immediate terror to the actual historical folklore of Mill Creek, we have to ask the lingering question: who was the faceless man in the clearing?
Section 3, History of the Poachers, the Forest's Justice. The next morning, shaking and scratched up, the cousins go back to the Mill Creek diner. They tell Earl what they saw. Earl quietly locks the diner doors and finally explains the grim history that burst this whole nightmare. The origin of this curse traces back to one specific year, 2008. Two local poachers, Elijah Carter and Daniel Voss, were caught hunting out of season, specifically targeting pregnant elk. The Forest Service couldn't formally build a case against them, but the deeply rooted families of Blackwood Forest, they believed in their own brutal form of frontier justice.
And that vigilante justice was merciless. By the time spring rolled around, Elijah Carter was found hanging from a tree in the woods. His mouth had been violently sewn shut with thick fishing line, and pinned to his chest was a note with a singular, gruesome message. So you can't lie about the deer anymore.
Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is how the historical violence connects directly to the supernatural encounter. Elijah was the one found dead with the stitches. Daniel Voss, his partner, he vanished completely. The authorities never found him. Earl explains that Daniel is still in those woods, forced to eternally roam as the Lantern Man, looking for a replacement. And Elijah, the faceless entity Jake and Tyler saw, was actively trying to trap them.
Section 4, The Cycle of the Hunt, Rules of the Curse. Look, this isn't a random haunting. It's a highly specific, supernatural machine. Let's break down how Blackwood Forest actually operates. According to the folklore, the curse demands a brutal exchange. Step 1. By choosing to follow that swaying lantern in the dark, you are unknowingly agreeing to the hunt. Step 2. You don't actually get to shoot the deer. In a twisted penalty for the poaching, you become the prey. The forest claims you. And step 3, you are cursed to carry the lantern forever, eternally leading the next generation of desperate hunters into the dark. Elijah was actively looking for his replacement when he lured Jake and Tyler.
To prove this isn't just some campfire tale, Earl reveals the absolutely most terrifying rule of the phenomenon. When the curse claims a replacement, it strips away their human identity, but it leaves behind a physical echo. The woods take your face, but they keep your walk. So the crucial point is this terrifying paradox of how the entity operates. Earl slides over a newspaper clipping dated 2009. It reads, "Missing, Tyler Reed, 24. Tyler is sitting right there at the diner table, staring at his own name. But the photograph in the clipping, it isn't Tyler. It's a man who went missing back in 1998, a man with Tyler's exact face. The entity swaps identities across time, shuffling faces like a deck of cards to sustain the curse." Section 5, A Modern Warning. Jake's Return. You'd think surviving the woods once would be enough, right? But 3 nights later, at 1:10 a.m., guilt and a total lack of sleep pull Jake back. He convinces himself he just needs to go to the North Trail to grab Duke's collar off that fallen log. He goes alone.
He finds the collar, but 100 feet ahead, the brass lantern is swaying again. Despite knowing the rules, the hypnotic pull draws him toward the clearing. This time, there are 2 men waiting.
One is the faceless entity in flannel. The other is a younger man in jeans. When the younger man turns around, Jake's heart stops. The figure is wearing Jake's own face, but the mouth is violently sewn shut with black thread. The curse has already claimed a new victim, wearing his face. And then, deep in the dark behind Jake, a third light flickers on.
Which brings us to the present day and the local survival rules for driving down Highway 17 past Milk Creek. Listen closely. If it's a new moon, keep your high beams off. If you see two lights moving slowly between the trees, one leading, one following 100 feet behind, never pull over. And if you roll down your window and hear the heavy sound of breathing mixed with the faint jingle of brass, drive faster.
We've mapped out the legend, the brutal history, and the relentless mechanics of Blackwood Forest. We know that the curse is a cycle that never truly ends, because out there in the fog, the lantern men are always looking for a third. So I'll leave you with this final thought. If you see a light swaying in the dark woods, will you follow it?